Have you ever wondered why a man who once couldn't take his eyes off you suddenly grows silent, distracted, as if a veil of distance has fallen between you? Most women assume that attraction dies because he no longer desires them, but the deeper truth is stranger. Sometimes his silence is not rejection at all, but the echo of something within you that unconsciously pushes him away. What you think protects your heart may, in fact, be the very thing that suffocates his. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious is always speaking in symbols, and nowhere is that more evident than in the fragile theater of male and female desire. Attraction is not a game of surface charm, it is a mirror of archetypes colliding. The maiden, the mother, the temptress, the queen, each archetype whispers through your behavior, through the way you speak, even in the pauses of silence. When you unconsciously choose the wrong mask, the energy between you shifts. He feels the dissonance before he can name it, and distance grows where intimacy once flourished. These are not deliberate mistakes, but forbidden ones, woven deep into the unconscious, where your shadows dwell. And without knowing it, many women commit them again and again. Imagine a woman who clings to control, believing that by managing every detail she can preserve the bond. In truth, her control signals distrust, a silent confession that she does not believe in the natural flow of masculine energy. To the male psyche, this feels like suffocation, an erosion of the polarity that fuels desire. He may not protest, he may even smile, but inwardly his archetypal fire begins to dim. Or consider the woman who hides her authentic feelings behind a mask of perfection. She believes that showing vulnerability will weaken her, yet the very shield she polishes becomes her prison. Jung taught that the persona, the mask presented to the world, protects the ego but starves the soul. When a man encounters only a mask, he feels an emptiness, a sense that something sacred is missing. Without realizing it, she kills attraction by denying him access to the raw, unpolished truth of her essence. There is also the subtle mistake of overgiving. Many women pour themselves endlessly into a man's life, confusing love with sacrifice. But psychologically, overgiving is often a disguised cry for validation. It arises not from abundance but from the shadow of worthlessness. And paradoxically, the more she gives without boundaries, the less he values what she offers. Attraction is not sustained by need, but by presence, by the luminous balance between self and other. Each of these mistakes emerges from unconscious patterns, shadows of childhood wounds, echoes of past betrayals, the invisible hand of unhealed trauma. They are not failures of beauty or charm, but failures of alignment with the deeper feminine archetypes that men instinctively respond to. A man may be captivated by a woman's appearance, but he remains bound when her energy resonates with timeless symbols, the muse who inspires, the queen who commands respect, the lover who opens the gates to mystery. When those archetypes are buried under fear, control, or pretense, attraction falters, even if everything else appears perfect. And so the paradox unfolds: what women often do to protect attraction, control, perfection, sacrifice, are the very forces that poison it. To understand this is to step into a new realm of feminine power, where psychology and archetype merge, and where self-awareness becomes the most magnetic force of all. This is not manipulation, nor trickery. It is the art of shadow work, the courage to look inward and see how the unconscious speaks through action. The forbidden mistakes are not sins, they are symbols. They reveal where the feminine has forgotten her own worth, where she bends her light to fit the expectation. The tragedy of these mistakes is not that they happen, but that they repeat in cycles. A woman may swear she will not lose herself again, only to awaken months later in the same pattern, the same aching silence from the man she loves. This repetition is no accident, it is the unconscious demanding recognition. Jung observed that what we do not make conscious returns to us as fate, and nowhere is this truer than in the dance of intimacy. A man's withdrawal is often less about him, and more about the unseen symbols a woman projects upon him. Projection is one of the most forbidden mistakes, though it hides beneath the guise of devotion. When a woman unconsciously casts her unhealed father wound upon her partner, she begins to treat him as a savior, a judge, or a ghost of the past. Her longing for security transforms into expectation, her sensitivity into suspicion. The man feels it instinctively. He may not understand the psychology, but he senses the heavy archetype pressing upon him, the role he never asked to play. Attraction fades because he is no longer seen as he is, but as a character in a drama written long before he arrived. Another hidden mistake is the denial of feminine mystery. In a world that idolizes transparency, some women believe that to hold back anything is deceit. Yet attraction thrives not in total exposure, but in the rhythm of revelation and concealment. The archetypal feminine is not a spotlight but a candle in a darkened room, flickering with secrets. When she empties herself in a desperate attempt to prove worthiness, she erases the very polarity that keeps desire alive. Men crave the unknown, the invitation into mystery. Without it, what remains is companionship, but not the electric charge of attraction. Silence, too, becomes a double-edged sword. There is silence that nourishes, the quiet presence of a woman at peace with herself, and then there is silence that punishes, crafted to provoke guilt or fear. The first deepens intimacy, the second destroys it. A man can feel the archetype behind her quiet. Is it the queen resting in her sovereignty, or the wounded child sulking in resentment? One silence draws him closer, the other drives him into distance. And all too often, women confuse the two, not realizing the unconscious intent is louder than the words never spoken. Consider also the erosion of boundaries. Some women allow a man to become the axis around which their life spins. They mistake surrender for devotion, but in truth, they abandon themselves. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires integration of both the masculine and feminine within. When a woman dissolves into a man, she betrays her own individuation. The result is not unity, but dependence. Attraction cannot survive in dependence, it feeds only on the dance of two sovereign souls. Then there is the shadow of competition. Many women, fearing abandonment, step into the role of rival instead of partner. They compare, they test, they challenge, believing it will spark his pursuit. But this energy awakens not desire, but defensiveness. A man is wired to battle competitors, not to romance them. When a woman unknowingly casts herself as his opponent, she kills the polarity that once made him chase her with fire in his veins. Each of these mistakes carries a paradox. They are born not of malice, but of fear, fear of loss, fear of invisibility, fear of not being enough. Yet fear, when acted upon unconsciously, becomes poison to attraction. The feminine essence thrives when rooted in self-worth, not in the shadows of fear. Until a woman confronts these shadows, she will find herself again and again at the edge of the same painful pattern. To step beyond these forbidden mistakes requires courage. It demands that a woman look not at the man for answers, but at the mirrors within her own psyche. For the unconscious is always speaking, always weaving its pattern. What most women fail to recognize is that attraction is not preserved through effort, but through essence. It is not the frantic proving of loyalty, nor the endless rehearsals of perfection, that keep a man enthralled. It is the woman's alignment with her deeper archetypal nature, the embodiment of authenticity, sovereignty, and inner stillness. When she loses touch with these, she begins to lean into counterfeit behaviors, each one a subtle fracture in the foundation of desire. The tragedy is that these fractures rarely appear dangerous at first. They masquerade as care, as kindness, as compromise. But beneath them lives the slow erosion of polarity. One of the most insidious mistakes is emotional overexposure without grounding. The belief that constant emotional release will bond two souls is deeply flawed. While vulnerability can create intimacy, unchecked emotional storms can drown attraction. A man needs to feel the stability of the feminine current, wild, yes, but not destructive. When every insecurity, every fear, every flicker of anxiety is unloaded without integration, he feels not closer, but burdened. To him, this signals not depth, but chaos. Jung might call this the anima in distortion, the feminine principle consumed by shadow, spilling unprocessed wounds instead of channeling transformative energy. There is also the fatal error of trying to mother a man. At first glance, it feels nurturing, protective, even loving. But underneath, it strips him of his masculine fire. When a woman unconsciously shifts into the mother archetype, she softens him into dependency. He may grow comfortable, but he cannot stay attracted. For attraction requires polarity, the masculine standing strong against the feminine current. When she becomes caretaker instead of lover, she feeds his boy instead of his man, and desire dies quietly in the background. Equally destructive is the mistake of abandoning one's own life. Many women slowly erase their own passions, friendships, and pursuits in the name of love. They believe that prioritizing him above all else will secure his devotion. But to the male psyche, this absence of self is not enchanting, it is suffocating. A man is magnetized by a woman whose world shines with vitality, whose presence reminds him of realms beyond himself. When she shrinks her life into his, she becomes predictable, emptied of the very energy that once drew him in. Then comes the mistake of masking discontent with artificial sweetness. Some women, terrified of conflict, suppress their true voice. They smile when they wish to scream, they agree when they long to resist. Yet the unconscious cannot be tricked. A man feels the falseness even if he cannot articulate it. He senses that he is not with the whole woman, but with a fragment, a performance. And performance, however polished, cannot sustain attraction. The feminine essence is magnetic precisely because it is real, raw, and untamed. These forbidden mistakes emerge when a woman places her worth outside herself. She looks to him as the measure of her beauty, her safety, her significance. But this dependence births behaviors that corrode attraction, control, overgiving, suppression, or surrendering her individuality. Each action may appear small, but together they weave a spell that tells him, unconsciously, I am not whole without you. And when a man feels he carries the weight of another's wholeness, he retreats. Not because he does not care, but because desire cannot live where freedom has died. The path forward is not about perfection, but about reclamation. A woman must reclaim her shadows, see where fear masquerades as love, and integrate the parts of herself she once disowned. Only then does she radiate the quiet power that draws a man in without effort. For attraction is not about chasing, proving, or clinging. It is about embodying the archetype that awakens his deepest instinct to pursue. Attraction thrives on polarity, and polarity thrives on authenticity. When a woman unconsciously slips into roles that are not hers, she fractures that authenticity, and the man instinctively feels the shift. One of the most dangerous of these roles is the performer. She becomes the entertainer, always smiling, always pleasing, always striving to maintain harmony. At first, this seems admirable, who would not want peace over conflict? But in truth, constant performance suffocates intimacy. He does not fall in love with a mask. He falls in love with the living soul behind it, the one who dares to reveal her storm as well as her sunlight. The forbidden mistake here is subtle, it is the repression of anger, grief, or disappointment in order to keep him near. Yet Jung warned that what is repressed festers in the unconscious until it bursts forth as projection or resentment. When a woman denies her shadow, it does not disappear, it simply leaks into her tone, her gestures, her silences. A man senses this dissonance, the tension between what is spoken and what is withheld. And in that gap, attraction begins to wither. Another forbidden mistake is the constant testing of loyalty. Many women, haunted by past betrayals, unconsciously provoke the man to prove himself again and again. They stir jealousy, they create unnecessary conflict, they withhold affection to see if he will fight for them. These tests do not spring from feminine power, but from fear, a fear that he will leave, that she is not enough, that love is always on the verge of collapse. While a man may endure the tests at first, eventually he grows weary. Desire cannot survive in a battlefield of suspicion. Control also appears in another form, the endless demand for reassurance. The wounded feminine clings to his words, needing constant reminders of love, attraction, and commitment. At first, he may give them freely, but soon they lose their meaning. What she truly seeks is not reassurance from him, but reconciliation with her own self-worth. Until she finds it within, every promise he gives will dissolve like mist. Jungian psychology teaches that true security emerges only when the inner masculine and inner feminine within her unite, providing balance and grounding. Without that integration, she will always demand from him what can only be given by herself. The archetype of the temptress, too, can fall into distortion. When a woman uses sexuality as her sole currency, she unknowingly binds attraction to the physical realm. While the body is magnetic, it cannot sustain desire without the depth of soul. A man may pursue her fiercely, but when the mystery is gone and the heart is absent, attraction burns out like a candle starved of air. The feminine power lies not in seduction alone, but in the fusion of body and spirit, in the way she awakens both his instinct and his imagination. Equally destructive is the slow erosion of respect. Many women, caught in the spiral of criticism, chip away at a man's sense of purpose. They belittle, mock, or dismiss, often without realizing the damage. To the masculine psyche, respect is oxygen. Without it, he cannot breathe freely in love. A man may tolerate conflict, he may even endure storms of emotion, but he cannot sustain attraction when respect dies. When she treats him as a boy to be corrected rather than a man to be trusted, polarity collapses. These mistakes, hidden beneath the surface, are rarely intentional. They arise from fear, from trauma, from the unresolved whispers of the unconscious. Yet their impact is undeniable. They fracture the bond, dim the spark, and turn desire into duty. And the cruel irony is that the woman often believes she is preserving love while she is, in truth, dismantling it piece by piece. To recognize these forbidden mistakes is the first step toward freedom. For once seen, they no longer operate in secrecy. The woman who dares to face them begins to awaken a new energy, one that is sovereign, magnetic, and untouchable by fear. The deeper tragedy of these forbidden mistakes is that they are not flaws of character, but distortions of archetype. Each one is a sacred feminine quality twisted by fear. The nurturer becomes the smothering mother. The loyal lover becomes the clinging shadow. The radiant muse becomes the hollow performer. The queen becomes the tyrant, demanding control rather than embodying sovereignty. What begins as love curdles into its opposite, not because the woman lacks worth, but because she has lost contact with her unconscious. Jung spoke of the shadow as that which we refuse to see in ourselves, and here the shadow is the silent puppeteer, pulling strings until attraction unravels. Take, For instance, the woman who hides her desires out of fear of rejection. She tells herself she is low maintenance, that she asks for little, that her silence is strength. Yet beneath this lies repression, a refusal to voice needs. Over time, her unspoken longing hardens into resentment. The man feels it, not through words, but through atmosphere, through the subtle chill of withheld truth. He senses he is failing her, though he cannot name how. Desire falters, not because she asked for too much, but because she asked for nothing at all. There is also the woman who abandons her polarity by over-identifying with masculine energy. She becomes the planner, the protector, the provider. Outwardly, this looks powerful, independent, capable, relentless. But inwardly, she sacrifices her feminine softness, her receptivity, her flow. A man may admire her strength, but he cannot feel magnetized by it. Attraction thrives on polarity, the masculine moving forward, the feminine receiving, inspiring, creating space. When she forgets this dance, she unconsciously places him in the feminine role. He withdraws, not because he resents her strength, but because he no longer feels the tension that fuels desire. Another forbidden mistake lies in emotional manipulation. Sometimes it appears as passive aggression, sometimes as calculated withdrawal, sometimes as tears summoned not from truth but from strategy. The unconscious fear driving it is clear: if I cannot keep him with love, I will keep him with guilt. But guilt is a poor substitute for attraction. A man bound by guilt may stay, but his passion dies. His body may remain, but his soul retreats. Then there is the archetype of the abandoned child, rising in moments of insecurity. She clings, she panics, she begs for assurance, believing her desperation proves devotion. But in truth, it signals to the masculine psyche that she is not rooted in herself. Desire cannot thrive where need consumes mystery. A man feels the shift instantly: where once she was a source of radiant energy, she now drains him, demanding that he hold the weight of her fractured self. Even silence, that powerful feminine tool, turns destructive when laced with punishment. True silence is magnetic. It is the queen resting in her sovereignty, allowing him to step closer of his own free will. But punitive silence is poison. It is withdrawal designed to wound, to remind him of his failures. He feels not drawn, but pushed away. The unconscious knows the difference, and so does his instinct. Every forbidden mistake carries the same root: fear of abandonment, fear of invisibility, fear of inadequacy. Yet in trying to escape fear, many women enact the very behaviors that summon it into being. The more she clings, the more he withdraws. The more she masks, the more he doubts. The more she controls, the more he escapes. This is the cruel irony of unconscious attraction dynamics: fear creates the destiny it most longs to avoid. But when these shadows are faced, their power dissolves. A woman who dares to witness her own patterns begins to reclaim her archetypes in their truest form. The mother becomes nurturing without suffocation. The muse becomes inspiring without performance. Every mistake that kills attraction begins as an attempt to secure it. This is the paradox: what women do in the name of safety becomes the very poison that erodes desire. To understand why, one must look deeper into the architecture of the psyche, where archetypes dwell, where wounds are born, and where the unconscious dictates more than reason ever could. A woman does not cling because she wishes to suffocate, she clings because the child within her once feared abandonment. She does not control because she seeks to dominate, she controls because she once felt powerless in a world that ignored her needs. Each mistake is a scar woven into behavior, a silent plea for safety disguised as strategy. One of the most forbidden patterns is self-erasure. Many women, desperate to be chosen, unconsciously dim their own light so he might shine brighter. They give up their passions, their friendships, their voice, believing sacrifice will guarantee devotion. But what the man perceives is not devotion, but disappearance. He fell in love with the woman who radiated aliveness, whose world was vast and luminous. When she contracts her universe to orbit only him, he feels the gravity of loss, not just of her vitality, but of the polarity that made him desire her in the first place. Another subtle mistake is competition with his purpose. A man's deepest masculine drive is toward mission, toward carving meaning in the world. When a woman unconsciously sets herself against that mission, demanding he choose her over his purpose, she fights against the very core of his archetype. In the short term, he may yield, but in the long term, he resents. The feminine does not need to compete with the masculine purpose, she amplifies it, inspires it, becomes the sanctuary where he returns from battle renewed. When she understands this, she ceases to battle for attention and instead becomes the place his soul craves. The archetype of the critic also emerges when fear distorts love. Many women, anxious about losing their bond, begin to correct, belittle, or mold him into an image of safety. They justify it as helping him improve, but the masculine instinct hears only disrespect. Respect is the air he breathes, without it, he suffocates. Attraction dies not because she expressed needs, but because she cloaked her fear in contempt. Jung warned that contempt is a projection of the disowned shadow, what we reject in ourselves, we attack in others. When a woman criticizes without self-reflection, she reveals her own unhealed wounds, not his failures. There is also the silent mistake of ignoring her own inner masculine. A woman who refuses to cultivate discipline, structure, and self-responsibility unconsciously demands that a man carry both polarities for her. He becomes lover, father, savior, protector, and guide all at once. At first, this may feel intoxicating, he is her everything. But over time, he feels the weight of her unintegrated self. Attraction collapses beneath the burden, for no man can remain captivated by a woman who abandons her inner balance. Finally, one of the most dangerous mistakes is confusing drama with passion. Some women, terrified of stillness, provoke chaos, believing that emotional storms prove intensity. But true attraction is not born from chaos, it is born from polarity, from the sacred tension of opposites. Drama exhausts the masculine. It drains his spirit and turns his desire into weariness. Passion, by contrast, nourishes, elevates, and magnetizes. The difference lies in her relationship with her own unconscious. Does she express emotion from integration, or from fragmentation? These patterns are not sins, they are invitations. Each forbidden mistake points back to the same truth: attraction dies when fear commands the feminine. But when she dares to see the fear, to hold it in the light of consciousness, everything changes. The shadow becomes power, the wound becomes wisdom, the fear becomes freedom. And from that freedom arises a woman who no longer kills attraction unknowingly, but embodies it effortlessly, because she has chosen to know herself. Attraction is sustained not by perfection, but by polarity, and polarity only breathes when two souls remain distinct, sovereign, and whole. Yet countless women unconsciously sabotage this sacred tension by trying to dissolve themselves into the man they love. They mistake fusion for intimacy, sameness for safety, possession for devotion. What they do not see is that desire is born in the space between two individuals. When the boundaries blur, when she abandons her individuality to become his shadow, he no longer feels magnetized, he feels engulfed. The unconscious whispers, there is no polarity here, only sameness. And sameness, while comforting, is the death of attraction. Another mistake arises when women weaponize vulnerability instead of embodying it. Authentic vulnerability, tears that flow from truth, fears admitted without agenda, draws a man closer. But when vulnerability becomes strategy, when it is used to manipulate guilt or provoke rescue, it ceases to be vulnerability at all. The man feels it in his bones, he is not encountering her essence, but her performance. Jung warned of this distortion when he spoke of the persona, the mask that hides the soul beneath. True desire is not ignited by a mask, but by the unfiltered soul that dares to stand in the open. There is also the error of measuring love only through external gestures. Some women believe that his devotion can be proven solely by texts, gifts, constant attention. While these gestures matter, they are not the essence of masculine devotion. A man reveals his love not only in words, but in presence, in the way he builds, protects, and chooses her consistently. When she overlooks these deeper symbols and demands constant superficial proof, she diminishes the sacred energy that fuels his giving. He feels unappreciated, unseen, reduced to an endless test. And nothing kills attraction faster than the feeling that nothing is ever enough. The archetype of the saboteur also lives in the unconscious feminine. She appears when a woman believes love is destined to fail, when old wounds whisper that happiness cannot last. So she begins to destroy what she most desires, through suspicion, through provocation, through rejection of intimacy just when it deepens. She thinks she is protecting herself from inevitable loss, but in truth, she is summoning it. This is the power of the shadow, it creates the very fate it fears. Until she integrates this archetype, she will unconsciously end every story at the very moment it could become eternal. Another forbidden mistake is neglecting her own radiance. A woman's beauty is not skin deep, it is the glow of self-respect, the vitality of a soul in motion, the luminosity of purpose and play. Yet many women, once they feel secure in love, stop tending to their own essence. They forget to nourish body, mind, and spirit, believing the bond will hold itself. But attraction is not a static flame, it is a fire that needs oxygen. When she abandons her growth, her passion, her curiosity, she dims. And when she dims, he feels it, not as judgment, but as absence. The most insidious of all mistakes, perhaps, is the surrender of sovereignty. When a woman makes a man the sole source of her worth, she unconsciously gives him the power to define her. She waits for his attention to feel beautiful, his approval to feel valuable, his desire to feel alive. But no man can bear the weight of a woman's entire selfhood. He may love her deeply, yet he will recoil from the burden. Attraction does not bloom in dependency, it blooms in freedom, when two sovereign beings choose each other without need. Every mistake comes back to this truth: attraction dies not because men stop desiring women, but because women stop embodying themselves. The feminine essence is already magnetic. It is already whole. It is only the shadows of fear, control, and erasure that distort it. When those shadows are named and integrated, attraction ceases to be fragile. It becomes inevitable. The unconscious is relentless in its lessons. When a woman refuses to confront her inner shadows, they surface in the very moments she most longs for intimacy. She reaches out for closeness, yet her unhealed wounds push him away. She wants to be adored, yet her fear of abandonment drives her into control. She longs to be respected, yet her hidden resentment leaks out as criticism. And so, without knowing, she becomes the architect of the distance she dreads. Jung warned that until the unconscious is made conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. For many women, failed attraction is not fate at all, it is shadow work left undone. One forbidden mistake born from this shadow is the demand for constant emotional rescue. Some women unconsciously expect a man to be healer, therapist, and savior all at once. Every conflict, every inner storm, every fear is placed into his hands. Yet while the masculine can hold, protect, and guide, he cannot integrate the feminine shadow on her behalf. That is her sacred work. When she mistakes his love for a substitute for her inner integration, attraction begins to collapse. He does not withdraw because he lacks care, but because he feels the weight of a burden that no man can carry. There is also the subtle but devastating mistake of clinging to the past within the present. Old betrayals, old wounds, old ghosts creep into new love. She interrogates, she suspects, she anticipates hurt before it comes. A man may begin with patience, but slowly he feels as though he is battling invisible rivals, the phantoms of other men, other stories, other heartbreaks. Attraction fades, not because of who he is, but because he cannot compete with a past that never ends. Until she frees him from her ghosts, he cannot give himself fully to her presence. Another distortion arises when the feminine abandons receptivity altogether. Some women confuse openness with weakness, so they harden into control, into relentless independence, into refusal of help. Outwardly, this seems strong. But inwardly, it blocks polarity. A man cannot pour into a vessel already full of its own defenses. He may admire her independence, but he cannot desire it endlessly. What ignites him is not helplessness, but the magnetic pull of a woman who receives while still remaining sovereign. To reject receptivity altogether is to cut the masculine off from his most primal offering, the desire to give, to provide, to pursue. There is also the mistake of letting fear of scarcity govern love. Some women act as though every moment with him could be the last, gripping, hoarding, suffocating. But attraction is not born of fear, it is born of abundance. A man feels pulled toward the woman who glows with the sense that love overflows from her, who chooses him not out of desperation, but out of sovereignty. Scarcity energy repels, abundance energy magnetizes. The difference lies not in what she does, but in what she embodies. And perhaps most dangerous of all is when a woman forgets her cyclical nature. The feminine is not linear, it ebbs and flows, it waxes and wanes, like the moon. When she denies her rhythms, forcing herself into masculine constancy, she betrays her own essence. He feels it. He may not name it, but he senses that her energy no longer moves like a river, but like a rigid wall. The man's attraction thrives when he is pulled into her mystery, her changing tides, her luminous unpredictability. When she kills her own cycles, she kills the very current that animates desire. All of these forbidden mistakes share one root, fear of not being enough. Yet the truth is paradoxical. When a woman reclaims her wholeness, when she stops seeking worth in his gaze, when she embodies the archetypes in their purest forms, attraction is not fragile but unstoppable. Desire becomes a reflection of her essence, not a negotiation of her fears. The secret thread weaving through every forbidden mistake is disconnection from the self. When a woman forgets who she is beyond the man, beyond the relationship, beyond the roles she performs, she unconsciously collapses into dependency. Jung's process of individuation reminds us that true power arises when the unconscious is integrated into the whole, when the fragments of shadow, persona, anima, and archetype are woven back into unity. Without this work, a woman hands her wholeness to a man, asking him to complete her. And no matter how much he gives, he cannot. His love may soothe, but it cannot substitute for the inner marriage she refuses to consummate with her own soul. One of the gravest mistakes is abandoning the body. The feminine essence is incarnate, sensual, rooted in rhythm and presence. Yet many women, trapped in the prison of the mind, detach from embodiment. They neglect their sensuality, their breath, their dance with the physical world. A man feels this absence instantly. Attraction is not sustained merely by words or gestures, it is carried in how she moves, how she touches, how she breathes life into a room. When she disconnects from her body, she disconnects from the very magnetism that awakens his instinct. Another shadowed mistake is chasing his validation while silencing her own intuition. The feminine intuition is one of the most powerful forces in attraction. It is the quiet knowing that guides her boundaries, her timing, her presence. But when fear drowns intuition, she begins to second-guess, to overanalyze, to contort herself for approval. He senses the loss of trust in herself, and therefore loses trust in her energy. A woman who cannot stand in the authority of her own intuition becomes unanchored, swayed by every breeze of insecurity. Desire does not bloom in instability, it blooms in the gravity of a woman who knows her own truth. There is also the forbidden mistake of placing all joy in his hands. She waits for his presence to feel alive, for his praise to feel beautiful, for his plans to feel purposeful. But to the masculine psyche, this wait feels suffocating. He does not desire to be the sole source of her happiness, he desires to contribute to a life already radiant. Jung observed that relationships are crucibles for individuation, not substitutes for it. When she abandons her own joy, she unknowingly kills the polarity by which he was first drawn. Equally destructive is the loss of boundaries under the guise of love. Some women allow betrayal, disrespect, or neglect to pass unchecked, convincing themselves that patience or sacrifice will preserve the bond. But attraction cannot coexist with self-abandonment. A man cannot desire the woman who betrays herself for him, because she ceases to embody the archetype of the queen. She becomes the servant, the supplicant, the shadow of her own worth. Respect dies, and with it, desire. Another distortion is dramatizing the natural masculine need for space. When a man pulls back into solitude or focus, some women panic, interpreting it as rejection. They chase, they demand, they collapse. Yet the masculine needs withdrawal as much as the feminine needs expression. When she cannot hold herself steady during his retreat, she interrupts the rhythm of polarity. He feels not freedom, but pressure. And pressure extinguishes attraction faster than absence ever could. Ultimately, each of these mistakes reveals a deeper lesson: attraction is never about chasing or holding. It is about being. The feminine is magnetic not because of effort, but because of essence. When she trusts her archetypes, when she tends to her body, honors her intuition, holds her boundaries, and chooses joy for herself, attraction ceases to be something fragile or fleeting. It becomes a natural response, the gravitational pull of sovereignty. The forbidden mistakes are not curses, they are invitations. They show her where she has abandoned herself, where she has confused fear for love. When the feminine finally dares to gaze directly at these shadows, something extraordinary happens. The very mistakes that once killed attraction transform into doorways of power. The urge to control, once born of fear, becomes sovereignty when integrated, the queen who sets boundaries not from panic but from dignity. The habit of overgiving, once fueled by insecurity, becomes generosity balanced with self-worth, the lover who pours from fullness rather than emptiness. Even the shadow of perfection, the mask polished to hide wounds, becomes authenticity when she lets the cracks show, revealing the beauty of her unvarnished soul. Jung taught that individuation is not the destruction of the shadow but its integration. And when a woman integrates, attraction ceases to be fragile, it becomes archetypal, timeless, irresistible. This is the hidden truth most never realize: a man is not attracted to what she does, but to what she embodies. She can wear the finest clothes, speak the sweetest words, offer endless devotion, yet if the unconscious is riddled with fear, he will feel it. Desire is not fooled by appearances, it responds only to essence. The archetypal feminine, the muse, the queen, the wild maiden, the priestess, is magnetic precisely because she does not chase, does not contort, does not beg. She stands in herself, radiant, whole, unattached to outcome. This is the paradox that terrifies the ego yet enthralls the masculine. She needs nothing from him, and therefore he cannot resist her. The final and most forbidden mistake, then, is forgetting this truth, forgetting that attraction is not earned but embodied. Women kill desire when they believe they must strive for it, when they turn love into performance, sacrifice, or control. But when they remember, when they return to the still center of their being, they discover that attraction was never about him at all. It was always about her alignment with herself. Freedom comes when she releases the chains of external validation. She no longer seeks to be chosen, for she has already chosen herself. She no longer fears abandonment, for she no longer abandons her own soul. She no longer clings to the illusion of control, for she trusts the flow of polarity, the eternal dance of masculine and feminine energy. In this state, her presence alone is irresistible, not because she is flawless, but because she is real. Men feel it instantly. The way she walks into a room, not demanding attention but radiating it. The way her eyes hold both softness and sovereignty. The way she listens without collapsing into need, speaks without shrinking into silence, loves without losing herself. This is the woman who no longer makes forbidden mistakes, not because she is perfect, but because she has reclaimed every shadow and turned it into gold. Attraction, then, is no longer something she must chase or fear losing. It becomes a natural consequence of her wholeness. Men are drawn, not out of obligation or manipulation, but out of instinct, out of awe. They feel the archetypal pull of the eternal feminine, the muse who inspires, the queen who commands respect, the lover who awakens mystery. And she, in turn, no longer grasps for them. She chooses, as freely as they once chose her. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.